Part 1. The river that created civilization. Close your eyes. Imagine standing on a limestone cliff overlooking a vast river valley, 5,000 years before this moment. The sun rises over the eastern desert, painting the Nile's waters the color of molten copper. Below you, fields of emmer wheat stretch to the horizon, their stalks heavy with grain that will feed a population of millions. In the distance, white limestone pyramids catch the first light of dawn, structures so massive they will still stand when Rome is founded, when the birth of Christ occurs, when you, thousands of years later, pause to wonder at their existence. But here's what defies comprehension: this desert that surrounds you on all sides, this hostile, waterless wasteland of sand and stone, should have prevented any civilization from emerging here. Egypt receives less than 1 inch of rainfall per year. The temperature in summer regularly exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Without the Nile, this would be uninhabitable desert, like the Sahara that stretches for thousands of miles to the west. Yet somehow, against all ecological logic, the ancient Egyptians created one of history's longest-lasting civilizations right here. A culture that endured for over 3,000 years, longer than the time separating us from the fall of Rome. A society so sophisticated that when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, the pyramids were already more ancient to him than he is to us. How? How did farmers who once scratched out survival in Neolithic villages transform themselves into pyramid builders? How did a Bronze Age society, without iron tools, without wheeled vehicles, without even the horse for most of its early history, create monuments that still challenge modern engineering? How did a kingdom built on mud and reed boats become the ancient world's first superpower? The answer begins with water. But not just any water, water that behaved like clockwork, water that arrived on schedule with near-perfect reliability for millennia, water that transformed barren sand into the most productive agricultural land in the ancient world. Every year, like clockwork, around mid-July, the Nile River flooded. Not a destructive, chaotic flood like the Tigris or Euphrates, which could arrive unpredictably and drown entire cities. The Nile's flood was gentle, predictable, life-giving. It rose gradually over 3 months, depositing nutrient-rich black silt across the floodplain, then receded just as gradually, leaving behind perfect farming conditions. This annual miracle occurred with such reliability that the ancient Egyptians organized their entire calendar around it: Ake, inundation; Parate, growing; and Shimu, harvest. But this raises another impossible question: how did a river flowing through one of Earth's driest regions produce such reliable floods? The answer lies thousands of miles to the south, in the Ethiopian highlands and the lakes of East Africa, where monsoon rains fall during the African summer. These rains feed the Blue Nile and White Nile, which converge at Khartoum in Sudan and flow northward through Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. Ancient Egyptians had no way of knowing this. To them, the flood was purely divine, a gift from the god Hapi, who lived at the first cataract and poured water from sacred jars. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, referring to the rich black soil deposited by floods. Beyond the narrow fertile strip on either side of the river lay Dishret, the Red Land, the hostile desert that both protected Egypt from invasion and imprisoned it within natural borders. This geography created a civilization that was simultaneously isolated and cosmopolitan, protected yet eager to trade with the outside world. Yet the flood's reliability was both Egypt's greatest strength and its most profound vulnerability. When the floods were strong, Egypt prospered. When they weakened, as happened repeatedly during Egypt's long history, famine, political collapse, and chaos followed. The entire architecture of Egyptian civilization, its government, religion, art, and culture, was built on the assumption that the Nile would flood every year. When that assumption proved false, even the most powerful kingdoms crumbled. This documentary tells the story of a civilization that lasted longer than any other in human history. But it's not a story of unbroken glory. It's a story of repeated reinvention, of collapse and renewal, of drought and plenty, of conquest and resistance. It's the story of farmers and scribes, soldiers and slaves, queens and god-kings. It's the story of how climate shaped destiny, how technology transformed society, and how a single river created and sustained one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. We'll examine Egypt's history through 6 distinct lenses. First, we'll explore how modern science, from dendrochronology to DNA analysis, reveals truths the ancient Egyptians could never tell us. Second, we'll immerse ourselves in daily life at different periods, experiencing what it meant to be Egyptian across the millennia. Third, we'll trace the technological and political innovations that allowed this civilization to endure. Fourth, we'll witness the catastrophes, droughts, invasions, and climate shifts that repeatedly threatened Egypt's existence. Fifth, we'll see how Egypt's legacy shaped everything that came after, from medicine to mathematics. And finally, we'll ask what lessons ancient Egypt holds for our own civilization, facing its own environmental challenges. But first, we must go back to the beginning. Not to the pyramids or the pharaohs, but to the first people who looked at the Nile's floodplain and saw not just survival, but possibility. Part 2. How modern science reads the past. Before we can tell Egypt's story, we must understand how we know what we know. Ancient Egyptians left hieroglyphics, monuments, mummies, and papyri. But these sources tell only part of the story, usually the part their creators wanted remembered. Kings boasted of victories they never won. Temple inscriptions claimed divine favor during times of chaos. Official histories omitted embarrassing defeats or unpopular rulers. To uncover the full truth, modern archaeologists and scientists turn to what they call proxy data, nature's own archive, which cannot lie, cannot be edited by royal decree, and cannot flatter the powerful. Let's examine how these scientific detectives reconstruct Egypt's past. Dendrochronology. When trees speak. In the mountains of Lebanon, ancient cedars still grow where their ancestors once provided timber for Egyptian ships, temples, and royal furniture. When dendrochronologists cut cross-sections through these ancient giants, they find a year-by-year record of rainfall and temperature written in wood. Each ring represents 1 year of growth. Wide rings indicate years of abundant rain, narrow rings signal drought, and sometimes, most telling of all, damaged rings reveal volcanic eruptions that dimmed the sun and cooled the planet. By matching these patterns across multiple trees, living and dead, across multiple regions, researchers have created a continuous climate record spanning thousands of years. This technique, called cross-dating, allows scientists to determine the exact year a particular tree ring formed, sometimes with accuracy to the exact season. The pattern they discovered changed our understanding of Egyptian history. Around 2200 BCE, at the height of the Old Kingdom, tree rings across the northern hemisphere become dramatically narrow, indicating a sudden, severe climate event. The same pattern appears in Irish bog oaks, Californian bristlecone pines, and Siberian larches. This wasn't local weather, something global happened. This event, known to climatologists as the 4.2 kiloyear BP aridification event, involved severe drought across the Mediterranean, West Asia, and Northeast Africa starting around 2200 BCE. For Egypt, dependent entirely on the Nile's annual flood, this would have been catastrophic. Glaciology. The ice remembers. Deep in the polar ice caps of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists drill cores through ice deposited layer by layer over hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer captures tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere and preserves chemical signatures of past events, volcanic eruptions, forest fires, even industrial pollution from ancient civilizations. When glaciologists melt ice from around 2200 BCE, they find high concentrations of sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid, the telltale signature of massive volcanic eruptions. While they haven't definitively identified which volcano erupted, the chemical signature suggests a tropical eruption large enough to inject millions of tons of ash and sulfur into the stratosphere. These eruptions would have created a veil that dimmed sunlight across the northern hemisphere for months or even years. Global temperatures would have dropped by several degrees. But for Egypt, the critical effect wasn't temperature, it was rainfall. The Nile's source waters depend on monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands. When global temperatures drop, atmospheric circulation patterns shift, and these crucial rains weaken or fail. Sedimentology. Reading the mud. Perhaps most remarkably, researchers can now read the Nile's own history from sediment cores drilled deep into the delta and floodplain. These cores preserve layers of silt deposited by ancient floods, each layer telling us how high the Nile rose in a given year and how much sediment it carried. During periods of strong floods, the layers are thick and rich in nutrients. During droughts, they're thin and poor. By analyzing these cores alongside historical records and tree ring data, scientists can reconstruct the Nile's flood levels with remarkable precision across millennia. The sediment cores confirm what the ice and trees suggest. Around 2200 BCE, hieroglyphic records indicate the annual Nile flood failed for approximately 50 years, causing widespread famine. For a civilization utterly dependent on that annual inundation, the consequences were devastating. Harvests failed. Famine spread. The central government lost legitimacy. Egypt fragmented. Bioarchaeology. Reading the bones. Skeletal remains tell their own stories, stories of diet, disease, violence, and hard labor. When bioarchaeologists examine Egyptian remains, they find evidence that contradicts many romantic notions about ancient life. The average Egyptian stood about 5 feet tall. Dental wear from sand-contaminated bread was universal, even among royalty. Evidence of malaria, tuberculosis, schistosomiasis, and various parasitic infections appears across all social classes. Life expectancy hovered around 35 years, though those who survived childhood often reached 50 or beyond. But skeletal evidence also reveals violence. At Deir el-Bahari, archaeologists discovered a tomb containing 60 warriors bearing battle wounds, crushed skulls from maces, arrow wounds, buried during King Mentuhotep II's wars of reunification around 2000 BCE. These men died violently, but their king honored them with burial near his own mortuary temple. Genetics. The DNA revolution. In recent years, ancient DNA analysis has revolutionized our understanding of ancient Egypt. Studies of predynastic remains from sites like Badari and Nakata show Northeast African biological affinities, with populations descended from long-time inhabitants of the region. Later genetic analysis of Third Intermediate Period mummies revealed significant Levantine ancestry, suggesting gene flow during the Second Intermediate Period when Canaanite peoples settled in Egypt. These studies reveal that ancient Egypt wasn't ethnically homogeneous or isolated. Throughout its history, Egypt absorbed immigrants from Nubia to the south, the Levant to the northeast, and Libya to the west. This diversity was one of Egypt's strengths. It allowed the civilization to adapt and survive where others failed. Archaeoastronomy. Temples as calendars. Egyptian temples weren't just religious structures, they were sophisticated astronomical instruments. The Temple of Abu Simbel, built by Ramesses II, demonstrates this dramatically. Twice yearly, on February 22 and October 22, sunlight penetrates 185 feet into the mountain to illuminate statues of Ramesses and the gods Are-Horikti and Ammonius in the inner sanctuary. The god Ta, associated with darkness, remains in shadow. This alignment, accurate to within minutes, demonstrates the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of solar cycles. Similarly, the Great Pyramid of Giza aligns almost perfectly with true north, deviating by less than 4 arc-minutes. How did Bronze Age builders achieve this precision? They likely used stellar observations, possibly tracking the rising or setting of specific stars. This astronomical knowledge wasn't merely ceremonial, it was essential for agriculture. The heliacal rising of Sirius, when the star first became visible at dawn, coincided with the Nile's annual flood, providing an accurate calendar for predicting the inundation. Now, armed with this scientific foundation, we can tell Egypt's story, not as the ancient kings wished it told, but as it actually unfolded across 5,000 years. Part 3. Origins. From hunters to pyramid builders. The predynastic period. When Egypt was not yet Egypt 6000 to 3100 BCE. Long before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before hieroglyphics or temples, the Nile Valley was home to small bands of hunter-gatherers and early farmers. Understanding this deep prehistory is crucial because it reveals how Egyptian civilization emerged, not suddenly, but through thousands of years of gradual development. The Neolithic Revolution in the Nile Valley. Around 6000 BCE, the Khatan culture in Upper Egypt began developing agriculture, preparing and eating wild grasses and grains, and establishing unique funerary practices including early forms of necropolises. This represents the beginning of Egypt's Neolithic Revolution, the shift from mobile hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. The Fayum culture, which followed, introduced more sophisticated stone tools and began living in small bands and extended family groups led by chieftains. For the first time, we see clear evidence of social hierarchy and leadership structures that would eventually evolve into kingship. The Badarian culture 4400 to 4000 BCE. The Badarian culture, named after El-Badari in Middle Egypt, flourished around 4400 to 4000 BCE and represents Egypt's first clearly identifiable prehistoric culture with sophisticated burial practices. Badarian settlements were small and often temporary, with residents mainly involved in agriculture, keeping livestock, and fishing. Badarian tombs, though small and made of wood, already showed preoccupation with the afterlife. Deceased were buried with grave goods and food to sustain them in the next world. This represents the very beginning of Egypt's famous obsession with death and the afterlife, which would become central to their entire civilization. Badarian pottery demonstrates exceptional craftsmanship. One characteristic feature is exceptionally thin-walled pottery, technically sophisticated for its time. They also produced the earliest known Egyptian figurines, small statues of women and animals that likely had religious or fertility significance. Physical anthropological studies reveal that Badarian remains show biological affinities with other Northeast African populations, particularly those in Nubia and the northern Horn of Africa, indicating continuity with earlier African populations in the region. The Naqada culture. The path to unification 4000 to 3100 BCE. The Naqada culture replaced the Badarian around 4000 BCE and became arguably the most important prehistoric culture in Upper Egypt, eventually leading directly to the unification of Egypt and the formation of the dynastic state. Naqada, the First Amratian period, 4000 to 3500 BCE. During Naqada I, settlements were significantly bigger and more prosperous than Badarian ones, and more sedentary in nature. The inhabitants were possibly the first to fully exploit the Nile's flooding for irrigation purposes. Each village had its own animal deity associated with the clan of villagers. This formed the basis of the nome system that would later divide Egypt into administrative regions represented by their totems. We see the appearance of distinctive Egyptian iconography, the falcon representing kingship, the bull representing power, and various gods that would persist throughout Egyptian history. Naqada, the Second Gurzian period, 3500 to 3200 BCE. During Naqada II, Egyptian society evolved from egalitarian communities into stratified societies with chieftains and elites. This period witnessed revolutionary changes that set Egypt on the path to state formation. An important artistic motif was introduced that would recur throughout Egyptian art: the victorious warrior. This reflects increasing warfare between competing polities as leaders consolidated power. The increased stratification is reflected in grave goods and housing. Elites built larger houses and were buried with more valuable goods, while commoners had modest burials. There is evidence of craft specialization and labor division. Some people could now devote themselves entirely to specialized activities like pottery making, metallurgy, or administration, supported by agricultural surpluses. The name Naqada itself means gold city, presumably named after local gold mines that brought wealth to the region. Control of gold and other precious resources became key to political power. A palace and ritual precinct was constructed at Nekhen, Hierakonpolis, featuring a large oval courtyard surrounded by smaller buildings, clearly the precursor to the royal precincts of the early dynastic period. Naqada III, Proto-Dynastic period, 3200 to 3100 BCE. Naqada III is the final and most important phase of the pre-dynastic age, during which the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt took place. Several recurring characteristics of Egyptian civilization were introduced during Naqada III, including formal kingship and the conventions of Egyptian art that would persist for 3 millennia. Recent radiocarbon dating and Bayesian statistical modeling suggests that the pre-dynastic period was shorter than previously thought, between 600 and 700 calendar years from the Badarian culture to state formation. This is remarkably rapid compared to state formation elsewhere, which typically took thousands of years. In Upper Egypt, an estimated 13 kings reigned from Nekhen, Hierakonpolis. These kings were named after animals, relating to the favored totem of their hometowns, King Scorpion being the most famous. The ruler was seen as the personification of the god and wore the white crown of Upper Egypt. The unification, Narmer and the birth of dynastic Egypt 3100 BCE. Around 3100 BCE, one of history's most significant political achievements occurred, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt into a single state. The traditional account credits this unification to King Narmer, possibly the same person as the legendary King Menes, though modern scholarship reveals a more complex picture. The Narmer Palette, Egypt's first historical document. The Narmer Palette, discovered in 1897–98 at Hierakonpolis, is a ceremonial cosmetic palette about 63 centimeters tall, carved from a single piece of siltstone and dating to approximately 3100 BCE. It features some of the earliest hieroglyphics found in Egypt. On one face, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt as he grasps an enemy by the hair and prepares to strike with a mace, the classic pose of the victorious king. On the reverse face, Narmer wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, proceeding in a victory procession with decapitated enemies. This is the first preserved example where both crowns are worn by the same ruler, symbolizing dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt. Scholarly debates, conquest or consolidation. Scholars debate whether the palette represents an actual historical event, the violent conquest of Lower Egypt, or a ceremonial and mythological representation of unified kingship. Some archaeologists contend that Narmer was actually the last king of Upper Egypt before unification, with the actual union accomplished by his successor. However, the consensus view is that Narmer ruled when Upper and Lower Egypt unified between 3200 and 3000 BCE, though this may have been accomplished more peacefully than the warlike imagery suggests. Some scholars hold that Narmer began the unification process but didn't complete it, leaving it to his successors to finalize. Evidence from Egypt's second dynasty shows signs of continued conflict between Upper and Lower Egypt, suggesting unification wasn't permanent until King Kheskhemwy's reign around 2680 BCE. The early dynastic period, 3100 to 2686 BCE, consolidating power. The first two dynasties of unified Egypt saw the gradual consolidation of royal power and the establishment of institutions that would define Egyptian civilization for millennia. The capital was established at Memphis, strategically located at the apex of the Nile Delta where Upper and Lower Egypt meet. This location, chosen by King Narmer, allowed the king to control both regions effectively. During this period, Egyptians developed or refined many signature features. Hieroglyphic writing became standardized and sophisticated. The concept of divine kingship solidified, the pharaoh as living god. Administrative systems emerged to manage irrigation, taxation, and labor. Monumental architecture in mud, brick and stone appeared. Complex religious beliefs and practices took definitive form. Tombs became increasingly elaborate. Kings were buried in massive rectangular mud brick structures called mastabas, surrounded by subsidiary burials of servants and officials. The practice of burying living retainers with the king appears to have occurred in the first dynasty but was discontinued by the second dynasty, replaced by symbolic representations. Part 4. The Old Kingdom, the Age of the Pyramids. The Third Dynasty, the first stone monument, 2686 to 2613 BCE. The Old Kingdom represents Egypt's first golden age and one of history's most remarkable architectural achievements. It begins with King Djoser and his revolutionary step pyramid at Saqqara. Under the Third Dynasty, King Djoser and his architect Imhotep pioneered pyramid construction with the step pyramid at Saqqara, the world's first colossal stone structure. Before this, all Egyptian buildings, including royal tombs, were built of mud brick. Imhotep's innovation, building entirely in stone, revolutionized architecture. The step pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a theological statement. The pyramid represented a stairway to heaven, allowing the pharaoh's spirit to ascend to join the gods. Surrounding the pyramid was a vast complex with courtyards, chapels, and storage facilities, all enclosed by a wall over 10 meters high and stretching more than 1.6 kilometers. Imhotep himself became legendary, the only non-royal Egyptian to be deified after death. Later Egyptians revered him as the patron of scribes and medicine, and Greek writers identified him with their god Asclepius. The Fourth Dynasty, perfecting the form, 2613 to 2494 BCE. King Sneferu of the Fourth Dynasty commissioned 3 full pyramids, experimenting with angles and internal structures. His bent pyramid at Dahshur shows the change in angle midway through construction, likely due to structural concerns. His red pyramid, also at Dahshur, represents the first successful smooth-sided pyramid. Then came Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza. Built around 2560 BCE, the Great Pyramid is composed of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks averaging 2.5 tons each, and when completed stood 481 feet tall. It was sheathed in smooth white limestone that reflected sunlight like a beacon visible for miles. For 3,800 years, until the construction of England's Lincoln Cathedral in 1311 CE, it remained the world's tallest human-made structure. Even today, with all our technology, replicating it would be extraordinarily difficult. Recent archaeological evidence suggests rotating teams of workers, perhaps 10,000 to 20,000 at any given time, fed and housed in planned workers' villages. This wasn't slavery in the Roman sense, but corvée labor, mandatory service owed to the state, compensated with food, beer, and occasionally linen cloth. How did they build it? Even with modern analysis, mysteries remain. The precision of the construction, blocks fitted so closely that a razor blade can't fit between them, challenges our understanding of Bronze Age capabilities. The pyramid aligns almost perfectly with true north, deviating by less than 4 arc minutes. Internal passages align with specific stars. The mathematical relationships in its dimensions suggest sophisticated geometric knowledge. Khufu's son Khafre built the second pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller but appearing larger because it sits on higher ground. He also commissioned the Great Sphinx, a limestone statue 73 meters long and 20 meters high, with a lion's body and, presumably, Khafre's face. The Sphinx guards the approach to Khafre's pyramid and represents the king's divine power. Menkaure, Khafre's successor, built the third and smallest Giza pyramid, but compensated with exceptional quality. Parts were sheathed in expensive red granite from Aswan. Daily life in the Old Kingdom, the human cost of glory. While pharaohs built monuments for eternity, millions of Egyptians lived lives of hard labor and simple pleasures. Let me transport you to that world. You wake before dawn in a village near Giza, during the pyramid's construction. Your sleeping mat provides little cushion against the packed mud floor. You share this single room with your wife, 3 children, and your aged mother. The walls are mud brick, whitewashed on the inside. The roof is thatch. There are no windows, only a small opening near the ceiling for smoke. The bread from yesterday is already rock hard. As you break off a piece, you feel the gritty texture of sand baked into it. This sand will wear down your teeth by the time you're 40. Beer helps soften the bread and provides calories. Your wife brewed it last week, thick, nutritious, slightly sweet, only mildly alcoholic. You're a construction worker, assigned by the government to work on Pharaoh's pyramid. This is your obligation during Ake, the inundation season, when your fields are underwater and you can't farm. The government provides rations, bread, beer, onions, and occasionally meat or fish. You sleep in long barracks near the construction site. The walk to the pyramid takes an hour. Even before sunrise, other workers are moving along the same paths. Thousands of men converge on the site daily. The scale overwhelms the senses, massive limestone blocks, each weighing tons, arriving continuously on wooden sledges. Your job today, positioning these blocks using copper tools, wooden levers, and extraordinary coordination. 20 men work together, lifting and shifting each stone into precise position. The foreman, a priest architect, checks measurements constantly with knotted ropes and sighting tools. The margin for error is measured in fractions of an inch. By mid-morning, the heat becomes vicious. The sun reflects off white limestone until everything glows. There is no shade, no relief. You wrap linen around your head, but sweat streams down, mixing with limestone dust until you taste it. At noon, work stops. The ration arrives: bread, lentils, onions, beer. The workers' village features planned streets, barracks, and even a rudimentary healthcare system. Archaeologists have found evidence that injured workers received medical treatment, with broken bones set and infections treated. After the meal, brief rest. Some men play Senet, a board game popular across all classes. Then the foreman calls you back. The afternoon shift begins. More lifting, positioning, checking. Every day, another few layers rise. You'll never see it completed, the project will take 20 years, but you know your work is eternal. This is your life. This is most people's lives. The gold masks and monuments we associate with ancient Egypt were created by millions like you, whose names are forgotten but whose labor endures. The collapse of the Old Kingdom, 2181 BCE. The Old Kingdom's centralization contained the seeds of its own destruction. Power gradually devolved to provincial governors called nomarchs, who built their own regional power bases. When climate change weakened the Nile floods around 2200 BCE as part of the 4.2 kilo-year aridification event, the central government couldn't maintain control. Hieroglyphic records describe years of hunger, with one inscription reading, "All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger, to the point where children were eating their own children." The Pyramid Age ended. Egypt fragmented into competing states, beginning the First Intermediate Period. Part 5. Chaos and Renewal, the Intermediate Periods. The First Intermediate Period, 2181 to 2055 BCE, when the center could not hold. The First Intermediate Period spanned approximately 125 years after the Old Kingdom's end, comprising the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and part of the 11th dynasties. Ancient texts suggest this era involved foreign invasions, pestilence, civil war, and famine severe enough to result in cannibalism. However, modern Egyptologists argue that the Old Kingdom's end wasn't sudden. Power slowly devolved from the pharaoh and Memphis to provincial leaders who could respond to farming crises more effectively than a distant ruler. The 65-meter deep Lake Karen in the Fayum oasis dried up completely. Around 2150 BCE, a sudden short-term cooling event reduced rainfall over the Ethiopian highlands, weakening the Nile floods. The political instability was characterized by rapid succession of rulers. The 7th and 8th dynasties together spanned only about 56 years. Around 2160 BCE, as Nile floods gradually returned, a new power center emerged at Heracleopolis near the Fayum, forming the 9th and 10th dynasties. Meanwhile, in the south, Thebes emerged as a rival power. The Theban kings were believed to be descendants of Entef, the nomarch of Thebes, called Keeper of the Door of the South. Eventually, around 2060 BCE, Mentuhotep II ascended the Theban throne and launched military campaigns northward. Over many years of conflict, he defeated the last king of the 10th dynasty and reunified Egypt around 2025 BCE. He earned titles like Uniters of the Two Lands and Restorer of Order. The Middle Kingdom, 2055 to 1650 BCE, Egypt's classical age. For 150 years, Egypt was divided. Kings in Heracleopolis controlled the north, while Theban rulers held the south. Then, around 2055 BCE, King Mentuhotep II of Thebes launched a military campaign that reunified the country. In his 39th regnal year, he adopted the title Uniters of the Two Lands and established Thebes as Egypt's capital. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs learned from the Old Kingdom's collapse. They maintained stronger control over provincial governors, developed a more sophisticated bureaucracy, and created the position of vizier, essentially a prime minister who handled day-to-day governance. They also established the tradition of co-regency, where an aging king would rule jointly with his designated heir, ensuring smooth succession. Military campaigns extended Egypt's borders. Fortresses were built deep in Nubia to control gold-producing regions and trade routes. The 12th dynasty pharaohs, particularly Senusret III and Amenemhat III, brought unprecedented prosperity. Massive irrigation projects in the Fayum oasis expanded agricultural land. Trade networks stretched from Punt in the Horn of Africa to Byblos in Lebanon. But the Middle Kingdom also ended in fragmentation. As the 13th dynasty weakened, foreign rulers called the Hyksos gradually gained control of the Nile Delta. These West Asian peoples brought new military technology, particularly the horse-drawn chariot and composite bow, that would transform Egyptian warfare. The New Kingdom, Empire and Glory, 1550 to 1077 BCE. The expulsion of the Hyksos by King Ahmose I around 1550 BCE inaugurated Egypt's imperial age. Traumatized by foreign occupation, New Kingdom pharaohs pursued aggressive expansion to ensure it never happened again. Within a century, Egypt controlled territory from the Fourth Cataract of the Nile in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria. The 18th dynasty produced some of Egypt's most famous rulers. Hatshepsut, one of history's few female pharaohs, ruled for 20 years and commissioned magnificent building projects including her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Her successor Thutmose III conducted 17 military campaigns, earning the title, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. But the most controversial figure was Akhenaten, who around 1348 BCE attempted a religious revolution. He elevated the sun disk Aten to supremacy, closed temples to traditional gods like Ammonius, and moved the capital to a new city called Akhetaten, modern Amarna. His artistic style broke with centuries of convention, depicting the royal family in intimate, almost bizarre poses with elongated heads and androgynous bodies. The revolution died with Akhenaten. His young successor, originally named Tutankhaten, changed his name to Tutankhamun, restored the traditional gods, and abandoned Amarna. Later pharaohs tried to erase Akhenaten from history, demolishing his monuments and omitting him from king lists. Yet his experiment in monotheism may have influenced later religious thought. Some scholars see echoes of Atenism in Hebrew monotheism, though this remains hotly debated. The 19th dynasty brought Egypt's last burst of imperial glory under Ramesses II, who ruled for 66 years. He fought the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though the battle ended in a stalemate, Ramesses proclaimed it a great victory and commemorated it across Egypt's temples. More significantly, it led to the world's first recorded peace treaty between Egypt and the Hittite Empire. Ramesses II was history's greatest architectural propagandist. He built more temples, erected more statues, and carved his name on more monuments than any other pharaoh. The temples at Abu Simbel, carved into a Nubian cliff face, remain his most spectacular achievement. For colossal seated statues of Ramesses, each 65 feet tall, guard the entrance. Twice yearly, on specific dates, sunlight penetrates 185 feet into the mountain to illuminate statues of the gods in the inner sanctuary, ancient Egypt's most sophisticated example of astronomical alignment in architecture. Part 6. The Chain Reaction Catastrophe and Transformation. When the empires crumble. The New Kingdom's imperial glory couldn't last forever. After Ramesses II's death, Egypt faced new threats from multiple directions. The mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders whose origins remain debated, attacked Egypt's Mediterranean coast during the reigns of Ramesses III. Though Egypt repelled these invasions, the effort exhausted the kingdom's resources. By 1077 BCE, the New Kingdom collapsed into the Third Intermediate Period. Egypt split once again, with power divided between the pharaohs in Tanis and the high priests of Ammonius in Thebes. For the next 4 centuries, Egypt was frequently divided, occasionally reunified, and increasingly vulnerable to foreign conquest. The late period saw Egypt fall under the control of successive foreign powers. The Kushites from Nubia conquered Egypt in the 8th century BCE, ruling as the 25th dynasty. The Assyrians invaded in 671 BCE, sacking Thebes and carrying away its treasures. A brief native renaissance under the 26th dynasty ended when the Persians conquered Egypt in 525 BCE. The Ptolemaic dynasty. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, ending Persian rule, the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his general Ptolemy seized control of Egypt and founded a dynasty that would rule for 3 centuries. The Ptolemies were Greek, not Egyptian, yet they adopted Egyptian royal traditions. They married their siblings according to pharaonic custom, were depicted in Egyptian style on temple walls, and supported Egyptian religion. But they ruled from Alexandria, a glittering Mediterranean metropolis that was more Greek than Egyptian, home to the famous Library of Alexandria and the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The last of the Ptolemies was Cleopatra VII, who ascended the throne in 51 BCE at age 18. She was the first of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language, and she cultivated popularity with native Egyptians. But she lived in an age when Rome dominated the Mediterranean, and Egypt's independence depended on maintaining relationships with Rome's most powerful men. Her liaison with Julius Caesar produced a son, Caesar Ion, whom she proclaimed as Egypt's rightful heir. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, she formed a political and romantic alliance with Mark Antony, one of Rome's triumvirs. They had 3 children together and ruled much of the eastern Mediterranean from Alexandria. But Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and Antony's rival, declared war. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian's forces defeated the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, but Octavian pursued. In August 30 BCE, Mark Antony died by suicide, believing falsely that Cleopatra was already dead. Cleopatra followed days later, dying by her own hand at age 39. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, ruled not by pharaohs but by Roman prefects. The age of the pharaohs, 3,000 years of native Egyptian civilization, was over. Part 7. The Legacy and Warning. The Eternal Gift. Egypt's legacy permeates our world in ways both obvious and subtle. The very word paper derives from papyrus, the reed plant Egyptians used to create the world's first practical writing surface. Our 365-day calendar, with its division into 12 months, evolved from the Egyptian calendar developed to track the Nile's floods. Medical knowledge pioneered by Egyptian physicians, including surgical techniques, diagnosis of diseases, and the use of herbal remedies, passed through Greek and Roman intermediaries to form the foundation of Western medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, describes 48 surgical cases with remarkable clinical precision, including head injuries, thoracic trauma, and spinal column damage. Egyptian engineering accomplishments continue to astound. The Great Pyramid remained the world's tallest human-made structure for 3,800 years. Modern attempts to replicate ancient construction techniques using period-appropriate technology have largely failed. We still don't fully understand how they achieved such precision without iron tools, wheeled vehicles, or complex mathematics beyond basic arithmetic and geometry. But perhaps Egypt's greatest legacy is the concept of civilization itself as something that could be preserved, protected, and passed down through millennia. The ancient Egyptians believed in eternity, not just in the afterlife, but in the endurance of their culture. They built in stone rather than mud brick because stone lasts forever. They developed hieroglyphic writing partly to preserve knowledge for future generations. They created one of history's first true bureaucracies to ensure continuity across reigns. The fragility of the ecosystem. Yet Egypt's history also teaches humility. Even the most enduring civilization proved vulnerable to forces beyond its control: climate change, foreign invasion, economic disruption, and the simple passage of time. Modern climate modeling suggests that without the Nile's predictable floods, human civilization might never have emerged in Egypt's deserts. Yet that same dependence made Egypt extraordinarily vulnerable to any disruption in rainfall patterns far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands. When global climate shifted, Egyptian civilization shuddered. Today, we face similar vulnerabilities on a vastly larger scale. Our interconnected global civilization depends on stable climate, reliable food production, and functioning infrastructure. Supercomputer simulations suggest that major volcanic eruptions, like those that helped topple Egypt's old kingdom, could still trigger global catastrophes. The eruption of Yellowstone or Indonesia's Toba volcano could inject enough material into the stratosphere to trigger a multi-year volcanic winter, disrupting agriculture worldwide. Egypt teaches us that resilience requires more than military might or economic prosperity. It requires adaptability, wise resource management, and institutions capable of surviving crisis. The civilizations that endured longest, Egypt chief among them, were those that could bend without breaking, that maintained cultural continuity even during times of political fragmentation. The mirror of history. We study ancient Egypt not merely out of curiosity about a dead civilization, but because Egypt reflects fundamental human experiences. The Egyptians worried about the same things we do: securing food for their families, gaining status and respect, understanding their place in the cosmos, and ultimately, defeating death itself through memory and legacy. Their solutions, building pyramids, mummifying bodies, filling tombs with treasures, seem exotic to us. But the underlying impulses are timeless. We still build monuments to preserve memory. We still seek immortality through our creations. We still wonder what, if anything, survives after death. Every civilization believes itself eternal. The Egyptians who built the pyramids could not have imagined a world where their gods would be forgotten, their hieroglyphs unreadable, their monuments plundered. Yet here we are, 35 centuries later, standing in the ruins of their achievements, marveling at their audacity while recognizing our own mortality reflected in their stones. History's great lesson is cyclical. Civilizations rise, flourish, decline, and fall. New ones emerge from the ruins. Egypt's 3,000-year span represents not one unbroken civilization, but several successive reinventions of Egyptian identity, each building on the foundations of what came before. As you walk through a museum displaying Egyptian artifacts, remember, these objects were created by people who laughed, loved, feared death, and hoped to be remembered. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Their civilization is dead, but their legacy endures, carved in stone, preserved in sand, and echoed in every subsequent attempt to build something permanent in an impermanent world. The Nile still flows through Egypt, just as it did 5,000 years ago. The pyramids still stand on the Giza Plateau, though stripped of their limestone casing and surrounded now by Cairo's urban sprawl rather than empty desert. But the civilization that created these wonders is gone, its people dispersed, its language dead, its gods abandoned. Yet Egypt lives on, in our imagination, in our museums, and in the fundamental human desire to create something that outlasts our brief lives. That, perhaps, is the most Egyptian aspiration of all, the dream of defeating time itself through the power of memory and stone. The eternal river flows on. The desert remembers. And we, the inheritors of human history, stand in awe before the achievements of those who came before, knowing that one day, others will stand before our ruins with the same wonder and the same questions. The legacy of ancient Egypt continues to shape our world today, in our calendar systems, our medical knowledge, our architectural ambitions, and our fundamental belief that human achievements can transcend mortality through memory and stone.